Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are tuning in from across Europe and beyond. It is Saturday, the 21st of March 2026, and you are listening to The State of Tech, the European Edition. I'm Samantha Lawrence.
And I'm Bob Russell. Welcome to the English language version of The State of Tech, which many of you may already know as the first Dutch language AI podcast. And now we're here, bringing you the same depth, the same energy, but with a European-wide lens and in English, so everyone can join the conversation.
That's right, Bob. And what a week it has been. We've got a packed show for you today. We're diving into Europe's position as the world's AI regulation leader, the booming unicorn scene, the semiconductor sovereignty race, and so much more. So grab your coffee, your tea, or whatever fuels your Saturday. And let's get into it.
Let's kick things off with what is arguably the biggest story shaping European tech right now, and that is the EU AI Act. Samantha, this has been called the most ambitious piece of technology legislation in history, and it's now fully in motion.
It really is, Bob. And what's remarkable is how the rest of the world is watching and, in many cases, following. The EU AI Act is the first comprehensive regulatory framework for artificial intelligence anywhere on the planet. It categorizes AI systems by risk level, from minimal risk all the way up to unacceptable risk, and it sets very clear rules about what's allowed and what isn't.
And we're seeing the effects ripple outward. Companies in the United States, in Asia, they're starting to align their products with EU standards because, frankly, if you want to do business in a market of 450 million consumers, you play by Europe's rules.
Exactly. It's the Brussels effect all over again, just like we saw with GDPR. But here's the tension, and I think this is the honest conversation we need to have. There are legitimate concerns that this regulation, while well-intentioned, could slow down European AI companies. If you're a startup in Paris or Munich and you're competing against a company in Shenzhen or San Francisco that doesn't have to navigate these compliance requirements, that's a real competitive disadvantage.
It is, but I'd push back slightly on that framing. What we're seeing in 2026 is that compliance is increasingly becoming a selling point. Enterprise clients, governments, they want to know that the AI they're deploying is trustworthy. European companies can walk into a boardroom anywhere in the world and say, "We are AI Act compliant," and that carries enormous weight.
That's a fair point. It's almost like Europe is betting that the future of AI is regulated AI, and honestly, looking at the headlines about deepfakes, algorithmic bias, and surveillance overreach, it's not a bad bet.
Not a bad bet at all. Now, speaking of European companies making waves, let's talk about the unicorn explosion. Because the narrative that Europe can't produce world-class tech companies, I think we can safely say that narrative is dead.
Completely dead, Bob. The numbers speak for themselves. Europe is now producing billion-dollar startups at a pace that genuinely rivals Silicon Valley in key sectors. We're talking about companies like Spotify, which has essentially redefined how the world consumes music. Klarna, which pioneered buy now, pay later, and is now a financial services giant. Revolut, which we'll talk more about in a moment. The list goes on and on.
And what's exciting is the breadth. It's not just one city or one country. You've got fintech powerhouses coming out of London and Stockholm, enterprise software leaders emerging from Berlin and Dublin, AI companies making breakthroughs in Paris and Helsinki. The ecosystem is genuinely pan-European now.
And that connects directly to something else we're tracking closely, which is the talent wars. For years, the story was simple. If you were a brilliant engineer or researcher in Europe, you moved to Silicon Valley. End of story.
That story has changed dramatically. What we're seeing now is a two-way street. Yes, some European talent still goes to the Valley, but increasingly, Silicon Valley veterans are coming to Europe. They're setting up in Berlin, in Stockholm, in Amsterdam, in Lisbon. And it's not just about lifestyle, although let's be honest, the work-life balance in Europe is a major draw.
It really is. But beyond the lifestyle factor, there are substantive reasons. European cities offer access to world-class research universities, strong public infrastructure, and yes, a regulatory environment that, while demanding, provides clarity. If you're building an AI or health tech or fintech, you actually know what the rules are. That predictability is valuable.
And the cost equation has shifted too. Hiring a senior engineer in San Francisco versus hiring one in Amsterdam or Tallinn, the difference is still significant. You can build a world-class team in Europe at a fraction of the Silicon Valley cost, and the talent pool is deep.
Absolutely. Now, Bob, let's shift gears to one of Europe's greatest success stories in tech disruption, and that's the challenger bank revolution.
Oh, this is one of my favorite topics. Digital-first banks like Revolut, N26, and Monzo have fundamentally transformed how Europeans think about banking. And when I say fundamentally, I mean it. These companies didn't just put a nice app on top of a traditional banking system. They rebuilt the entire experience from the ground up.
And the growth has been staggering. Revolut alone now serves tens of millions of customers across Europe and beyond. The user experience is so far ahead of traditional banks that it's almost embarrassing. You can open an account in minutes, send money internationally with real exchange rates, manage crypto, get spending insights, all from your phone.
What's interesting is how the traditional banks have responded. Some have tried to build their own digital offerings. Others have essentially conceded certain market segments, but the challengers keep moving faster. And this is a distinctly European success story. The regulatory framework, particularly the PSD2 directive that enabled open banking, created the conditions for this disruption to happen.
That's such an important point. Sometimes regulation enables innovation rather than stifling it. PSD2 basically forced banks to open up their data, and an entire ecosystem of innovation grew from that.
Exactly, and that brings us neatly to another regulatory success story, one that has literally changed the internet as we know it. GDPR.
GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. When it launched back in 2018, there were plenty of skeptics. Companies complained about compliance costs. Some American news websites simply blocked European visitors rather than comply. Remember that?
I do remember that. And look where we are now. GDPR has become the de facto global standard for data privacy. Countries on every continent have modeled their privacy laws on it, and here in 2026, it has spawned an entire privacy tech industry worth billions. European companies that specialize in consent management, data mapping, privacy-preserving computation, they're selling their solutions worldwide.
It's another example of Europe setting the rules and then the world following. And for European consumers, it has been genuinely empowering. The right to know what data companies hold about you, the right to have it deleted, the right to data portability. These aren't abstract concepts anymore. People use these rights every day.
Now, let's move to something that's been dominating the geopolitical tech conversation, and that's semiconductor sovereignty.
This is a big one. Europe's dependence on Asian chip manufacturing, particularly from Taiwan and South Korea, has been identified as a critical vulnerability. And the events of recent years, supply chain disruptions, geopolitical tensions, have only underscored how urgent this issue is.
The EU has responded with massive investments in domestic chip production. We're talking about tens of billions of euros in public and private funding to build semiconductor fabrication plants on European soil. The goal is not necessarily to match Asia's volume, but to ensure that Europe has strategic autonomy in critical chip technologies.
And it's not starting from zero. Europe has real strengths in semiconductor equipment, in automotive chips, in specialty processors. Companies like ASML in the Netherlands, which makes the lithography machines that are essential for producing advanced chips, are already indispensable to the global semiconductor supply chain.
ASML is actually a perfect example of hidden European tech dominance. Without their machines, no one on the planet can make cutting-edge chips. That's an extraordinary strategic position.
It really is. Now, Bob, 2 more topics I want to make sure we cover. First, the green tech innovation surge. Europe is genuinely leading here.
This is where I get genuinely optimistic about Europe's future. The EU's Green Deal has catalyzed an enormous wave of investment in climate technology. European companies are at the forefront of offshore wind, next-generation battery technology, green hydrogen, carbon capture, you name it.
And the scale is impressive. Europe has more offshore wind capacity than the rest of the world combined. European battery gigafactories are coming online at a rapid pace to reduce dependence on Asian battery imports. And the venture capital flowing into European climate tech startups has reached record levels.
What I find compelling is that this isn't just about saving the planet, although obviously that matters enormously. It's also industrial strategy. The global clean energy transition is going to be one of the largest economic transformations in human history, and Europe is positioning itself to be a leader in the technologies that will power it.
Exactly. Right. And finally, let's talk about something that doesn't always make the headlines but is quietly reshaping Europe's digital infrastructure: the open source movement.
This is fascinating. European governments and institutions are increasingly embracing open source software as a matter of digital sovereignty. The logic is straightforward. If your government systems run on proprietary software controlled by foreign corporations, you have a dependency problem.
We're seeing this play out in real time. Multiple European governments have migrated critical systems to open source alternatives. The European Commission itself has been a major advocate, and European companies are increasingly contributing to and building businesses around open source projects.
It's about control, transparency, and security. With open source, you can audit the code. You can verify that there are no backdoors. You're not subject to the licensing whims of a single vendor. For governments handling sensitive citizen data, that matters enormously.
And it creates economic opportunities too. A thriving ecosystem of European companies provides support, customization, and services around open source software. It's a model that aligns perfectly with European values of transparency and collaboration.
So, Samantha, as we wrap up this week's show, if you had to sum up the state of European tech in March 2026, what would you say?
I'd say Europe is playing its own game, and it's a smart game. We're not trying to out-Silicon Valley. Instead, Europe is building a tech ecosystem rooted in regulation that builds trust, in sustainability that builds the future, in digital sovereignty that builds independence, and in values that put people first. Is it perfect? No. Are there challenges? Absolutely. But the trajectory is genuinely exciting.
I couldn't agree more. And that's exactly why this podcast exists, to track that trajectory, to celebrate the wins, to call out the challenges, and to make sure the European tech story gets told with the nuance it deserves.
That's all from us today on The State of Tech, the European edition. Thank you so much for listening on this Saturday, the 21st of March, 2026. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you speak Dutch, don't forget to check out the original State of Tech podcast, the first Dutch-language AI podcast, where it all started. We'll be back next week with more from the European tech front lines. Until then, stay curious, stay informed.
And stay European about it. See you next week.
Bye, everyone.